Well, now we're in Eden. And in Eden, there are palmy hillocks, flowery laps, flowers of all hue. The roses have no thorns. All delight, all kind of living creatures, new to sight and strange. Two, of far nobler shape, erect and tall, godlike erect, with native honor, clad in naked majesty, seemed lords of all, and worthy seemed, for in their looks divine the image of their glorious maker. So now we're on to book four. And the things I want to talk about in book four, um, I'm going to mildly defend Milton, very mildly, from charges of sexism, although that's going to be very difficult. We got to talk about the fact that one of the themes in this poem is that hell kind of travels with you wherever you go, that hell and paradise, there is much a state of mind as a place. That theme really seems to begin to be established here. I'm going to bring us back to what we had talked about with Prometheus Bound, and whether or not we can liken what Satan is, what the metaphor of the fruit, and how much that pertains really to knowledge more than sin, that it pertains to knowledge more than anything else. And regarding the core point of this whole poem, that God's ways require justification, well, there's more here that Milton seems to suggest is God's fault. So Satan lands on the earth, and he lands on top of a mountain, and we start to get some language that indicates that wherever he goes, that hell is a state of mind. Line 20, the hell within him, for within him hell he brings. Nor from hell one step, no more than from himself can fly. Wherever he goes, he can't escape himself, and therefore he cannot escape hell. He goes into this monologue where he really seems to repent, and he seems to repent of how ungrateful he was, that he had a debt immense of endless gratitude, and he failed. And he really seems genuinely contrite. And he even goes so far as to suggest that his underlings, his demons in hell, are never going to understand just how tormented he really is on the inside, how much he's beating himself up. And again, and right around line 75, we get more language that hell is a state of mind. Which way shall I fly? Infinite wrath and infinite despair? Which way I fly is hell. Myself am hell. And in the lowest deep, a lower deep, still threatening to devour me, opens wide, to which the hell I suffer seems a heaven. So hell is psychological. Another thing, actually, this will carry over past this book as well. That seems Satan's continuing metamorphosis as far as his appearance is concerned. And in his turmoil, as he's ventilating, his appearance changes. Right around lines 115, his appearance starts to change. And actually, Uriel notices this and finally realizes his mistake in showing him the way. So Satan goes in search of the Garden of Eden, and this is interesting because the Garden of Eden is actually blocked. It's got one gate. It doesn't have a wall in the sense of an actual man-made artifice, but there's something like a wall right around 175. He's having trouble. Further way found none, so thick entwined as one continued brake, the undergrowth of shrubs and tangling bushes. So the bushes, the verdure of hell, I'm sorry, the verdure of paradise is so thick on the edges that it functions basically as a wall. But there is a gate, and he disdains to go through the gate. He chooses instead to jump over the wall. This is the concept that occurs in the Bible, the idea that a wicked person doesn't come in through the front door. The wicked person comes in like a wolf, the way in which they're not allowed. Which, by the way, that concept is at work in Hieronymus Bosch's The Adoration of the Magi, which is a great painting by Bosch. So he goes and looks at Eden, and we get all these descriptions of Eden, back to some of these classical things. I think it's amazing. Line 266, universal Pan, knit with the graces. Pan is a pagan figure. He shouldn't be there. So I thought it was funny that he put Osiris in hell as one of the demons. He was suggesting that the Greek gods were in hell. He enumerates. Actually, I hadn't mentioned it in my first podcast, but Hephaestus is down there. But here we go. Pan, however, apparently is in Eden, as are the three graces. So I think that's pretty funny. More more classical references. And unfortunately, we have to deal right now with Milton's potential sexism. And by potential, I mean blatant. Okay, line 295. Whence true authority in men, though both not equal, oh geez, as their sex not equal seemed. Well, what makes them not equal? This is going to be fun. For contemplation he in valor formed, for softness she, and sweet attractive grace. He for God only, she for God in him. That's good. Well, I think we can certainly a little bit of misogynism there. And she submits to him, albeit with gentle sway. You know, line 308, gentle sway, and by her yielded. I'm going to say a little bit in Milton's defense. All of that was blatantly misogynistic. But I want to add there's a reason he might have done this besides his own actual misogyny. And I'm making this argument despite the fact that there's overwhelming evidence throughout the rest of the book that goes against this. But when you write a story, there are only so many themes that you can stay true to without hypocrisizing yourself. I know it's not a word, but without having inconsistencies and paradoxes. And because one of the core themes of Paradise Lost is this concept of submission, hierarchies, orders, degrees. It's not something I've been talking about within the last few podcasts, but it's going to come up in books, certainly by book 6, if not by book 5. But really, we'll have to get into the hierarchical themes. And because Milton wants to take on the concept of hierarchy, he has to have a hierarchy in Eden. He has to be able to work with it. Part of the theme of the book is this concept of hierarchy, and so one of them had to be beneath the other. And he chose Eve. And I think that just seemed more natural to him. That doesn't necessarily. That's the one thing I'll say is that maybe it doesn't necessarily mean Milton really thinks that, but he needed to have a hierarchy in Eden in order to blame the fall. Because that's kind of, maybe that's really how I want to say it. Maybe the fact that she's submitting, you could argue that he thinks that submission is a flaw in paradise. And that's yet another thing that can be blamed for the fall. And that if it had not been for her subjugation, she would have been a little bit more impervious when the serpent comes to her. That's all I'll say. But unfortunately, he has to show Eve being a little on the thick side, a little stupid. So when she wakes up from having been created from his rib, she explains that she was all alone, and she starts to wander, and she sees a liquid plain, so she comes to a lake. This is around lines 455. And she lay down on this green bank, and she looks into the clear, smooth lake. Now we're on to like 460. And she bends over to look, and she sees herself. A shape within the watery gleam appeared, bending to look on me. I started back. It started back. But pleased I soon returned. Pleased it returned, as soon with answering looks of sympathy and love. There I fixed mine eyes till now, and pined with vain desire. So now I'm going to stop there. This is This is something Milton's very clever with. The use of the word vain here. He's using it with in both of its meanings. Both in the sense that to be vain as an adjective, a person who is vain, but also in the sort of adverbial sense, to do something in vain, to do something fruitlessly. And he actually did this before. He actually did this before in this book with the word divine. Back on line 291. For their looks divine, the image of their glorious Maker shone. Looks divine, the image of the glorious Maker. He's using the word divine pretty brilliantly. I really like this. Divine, of course, an adjective meaning divine or godly, but it also means as a verb to kind of discern, to realize. So he's using this in a kind of double meaning. Their looks are divine, but also to look upon them is to divine their divinity. Very clever. But back to Eve, coming back from her falling in love with her own reflection in the lake. She sees Adam, and she essentially says to him, "I'm hotter than you, and I know it. I just saw myself in the lake. I saw you, and quite frankly, I prefer myself. I espied thee, yet methought less fair, less winning soft, less amiably mild than that smooth, watery image. Back I turned. She was gonna go back to herself. She, she was gonna go back to see herself in the lake, but a voice tells her to return to him, and I guess Adam's just gonna have to grow on her. But of course, she sees that wisdom is excelled. Wisdom excels beauty, which alone is truly fair, and apparently he excels her in wisdom. All right, enough with this sexist stuff. Back to back to Satan. So Satan is watching all of this, and he's very envious, and he decides upon his course of action and how to corrupt them. And it sounds a lot like Prometheus. Knowledge forbidden? Satan asks, and it seems like a reasonable question. And Satan says, suspicious, reasonless. Why should their Lord envy them that? Suspicious, comma, reasonless, period. That must be the shortest sentence in this entire poem. Rarely is Milton that blunt. Suspicious, reasonless. The fact that God will not let them eat from the tree of knowledge, and that they have to live in ignorance. And Satan wonders at the idea that ignorance must be their happy state, which is kind of funny that Adam is supposed to be the wise one. Looking back on that, isn't that kind of silly? Okay, so he decides, and thinking about this, he sounds a lot like Prometheus. O fair foundation laid whereon to build their ruin. So he's figuring out how he's going to get them. Hence, I will excite their minds with more desire to know, and to reject envious commands, invented with design to keep them low, whom knowledge might exalt, equal with gods. So he's going to push them towards learning. Contrast that with Prometheus. This is Prometheus's claim to the chorus. Here's the whole truth in one word. All human skill and science was Prometheus's gift. Prometheus says that. So we're right back to that. Also, by the way, we had talked about in book 1 how Mammon, by his suggestion, had taught men to fish for gold. Well, here's Prometheus. The treasures of the earth, the bronze, iron, silver, gold, hidden deep down. Who else but I can claim to have found them first? Prometheus says that. So Prometheus caused man to fish for gold, much like Mammon did. So there's a lot in common between Prometheus and Satan. It ought to be somewhat tempting for me to fixate on the sexual component of this, because Adam and Eve have sex, and Milton says they have sex over and over again. And no matter how often they have sex, she will remain just as innocent. Both of them will remain just as innocent as they were. And Milton seems to suggest that he's being strident against the mores of his time by saying that, but they're connubial. They're married, so it's kind of an archaic skepticism there. It's not, it doesn't really speak to us um, in our generation. So moving on, back to the fact that the fall is partially um, God's fault. It's interesting that there's a security detail around the Garden of Eden, and that the archangel Gabriel has been tasked with it. I happen to be an attorney, and there's a maxim at in law. Once you undertake to help somebody, you're responsible for it. If you're walking, if let's say you're running along the Charles River and you see someone drowning, you do not have an obligation to help them. But once you do, once you start to help them, you suddenly become liable. And if you do anything wrong, they can sue you. Well, here there's a security detail in paradise. They've undertaken to protect them. They've undertaken to keep Satan out. How can you possibly not blame them for the fact that Satan got in? And by the way, he gets in twice. The first time he gets in, he gets all the way into sleeping Eve, and they find him whispering in her ear. I mean, it's a creepy scene, by the way. He starts whispering in her ear, discontented thoughts, vain hopes, vain aims, inordinate desires, blown up with high conceits engendering pride. He's whispering this to her while she sleeps. But two low-ranking angels come, and he seems to be a little disappointed that they don't recognize him right away. Think not, revolted spirit, thy shape the same, is what one of them responds to him. He says, you don't know me? I'm Satan. And Zephon answers, think not, revolted spirit, thy shape the same. They don't recognize him. And Satan's response is, not to know me, argues, yourselves unknown, the lowest of your throng. In Prometheus says something similar. When Prometheus is visited by Hermes, Prometheus' response is, this underling of gods makes a high-sounding speech, crammed with importance. In fact, Prometheus calls Hermes an underling twice. So that's another thing that Prometheus and Satan have in common. So Satan ultimately goes with these two sort of sentinels. I don't know where the expression all hell broke loose was first said, but line 918, here it is. Wherefore with thee came not all hell broke loose. It's kind of interesting that that's in there. I don't know the source of that expression. So there's a little bit of a showdown. We've got a showdown between Satan and Gabriel, and it looks like they're gonna fight. He's grasping both spear and shield, and now dreadful deeds might have ensued. They're about to fight. But then something happens. The Eternal, I suppose Milton must just mean God. They look up in the sky, and golden scales are hung forth in heaven, betwixt Astrea and the scorpion sign, wherein all things created first he weighed. And Gabriel invites Satan to sort of take the omen and see what's going to happen. What folly then to boast what arms can do, since thine no more than heaven permits, nor mine, though doubled now, to trample thee as mire. It's Gabriel talking to Satan. Trample thee as mire. I'm sure that's 17th century talk for I'm going to kick your ass. And the fiend looks up, Satan looks up to the stars, and he sees the scales. And by the way, you can't ignore references that you don't want to acknowledge. And I say that because Milton clearly has an interest in astrology. And later in the poem, he also makes alchemical references. But this is an astrological reference when he looks up into the heavens and he sees betwixt Astrea and the Scorpion sign. Those are two signs of the zodiac he's referencing. Scorpio is a constellation and it's one of the signs of the zodiac. Astrea is a virgin goddess, Virgo. And what constellation, what sign of the zodiac is between Virgo and Scorpio? It's Libra, and Libra's sign is the scales. So this is that's a legitimate, that's a astrological reference. And I sort of love this moment though. The forces of good head to head with the forces of evil, and Satan, murmuring, fled, and with him fled the shades of night. Thus ends Book 4.